Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar all about how farmers, ranchers, and other land managers in New Mexico can apply for a grant from NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. We've got a few people still streaming into the room, so get comfortable and we'll return in just a moment. All right, I show a little after 5:30. Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Getz, and along with Dean Bruce, we are the co-leads for NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. As the slide on your screen shows, what we'll be talking about tonight is how individuals, businesses, and nonprofits, all of them farmers, ranchers, land managers here in New Mexico, can apply for a grant from NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. So we'll go ahead and get started. So after offering you the welcome comes a bit of housekeeping. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted for tonight's presentation. And if you think of questions while you hear information, use that chat box in the center of your screen there at the bottom to key in those questions. We'll try to keep eyes on the chat as best as possible this evening as we go through different speakers. Alternatively, at the end of the presentation, you're welcome to use that raise hand feature and voice your question out loud. And you'll notice there at the bottom of the screen that for our Q&A, what we will prioritize are questions about the process. How do you apply? What is the linear sequence of making application to the grant program? Where we encounter those specific questions about what's eligible for purchase, what's ineligible for purchase, what you can expect us to offer in return is that we'll direct you to our FAQ, our frequently asked questions document. So just a quick agenda for us to guide tonight's conversation. We'll start out with just a few pointers on basic eligibility standards for individual applicant projects. Next up, we'll talk about conservation planning with NRCS, really important first step that all individual applicants must take before they apply for a grant. And through that, we'll hear from Kenneth Alcon with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. We'll take a peek at the timeline and the budget template that NMDA utilizes and that you'll be utilizing to really demonstrate how your project will go in terms of the activities and all of the eligible expenses associated with those activities to really fully implement your project. We'll spend some time talking about project sponsorship. That's another unique requirement for individual applicants. Only two places you can seek project sponsorship, and that's from your Soil and Water Conservation District, or if you're a member of a tribal community, you can work with a district or your Pueblo, tribe, or nation. So we'll hear from two speakers this evening, Chairman Eddie Vigil of the New Mexico Soil and Water Conservation Commission. He'll be speaking about how you link up with your Soil and Water Conservation District. We'll also hear from John Romero, and he's from the And very excitingly, he's part of a project effort this year to basically connect the Healthy Soil Program with the Pueblos, the tribes, and the nations of the state. We'll look at the letter of support template that you'll need to complete with one of those two parties in order to apply. We'll take a peek at the website where you'll find all the required documents. We'll also look at the online grant application, and we'll wrap up with a bit of Q&A before we adjourn. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my co-lead, Dean Bruce.
Okay, thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone for attending tonight. Like Katie said, my name is Dean Bruce, and I'm a soil and water specialist with New Mexico Department of Ag and co-lead on the Healthy Soil Program. So we'll just get started tonight. Excuse me. Where can Healthy Soil Program projects happen? They can happen on cropland, rangeland, forest land, orchards, market gardens, community gardens, and subsistence gardens. So you see that essentially any land that is involved in a type of production agriculture, whether it's small production or large scale production, is eligible for this program. And the only caveat to that is there must be an existing relationship to the land. Either you can own it, you can lease it, or you can manage it on behalf of the landowner or leasee. So you don't have to own land yourself to participate in this program. However, you do have to have landowner permission to implement a healthy soil program project on that land. There's no minimum acreage requirement. So when you're putting together your project, you can use acres or square feet as acceptable methods of measurement in your project description. Next slide, please. So who can apply? We do have two different applicant types for the Healthy Soil Program grants. Tonight, we are going to focus on you as the individual applicants. These can be individuals, businesses, nonprofits that are directly engaged in farming, ranching, or other forms of land management. And so that's tonight. If that's you, you're on the right webinar. As an individual applicant, the application period did open February 17th, and it will close April 21st with a maximum award of $22,000 per project. So have that in the back of your mind as you're beginning to develop your project. I'll just take a little bit of time to mention the eligible entity applications that are those types of projects that are eligible for the Healthy Soil Program. We do accept applications from pueblos, tribes, nations, acequias, land grants, soil and water conservation districts, and New Mexico State Cooperative Extension Service, as well as other local governmental entities with proven land management capacity to support healthy soil, such as irrigation districts. Those application period will open April 11th and close May 17th. So, but tonight, again, we're going to focus on you as the individual applicants. So next slide, please. Here in just a second, we're going to show a video of an example project from an individual applicant. And so hope everyone, their internet's capable of handling this, but if not, you'll be able to view it shortly, probably on our website. But we're going to go ahead and play a video of a applicant that has been awarded the Healthy Soil Program grant in the past. Katie, the sound's not coming through.
No sound?
It wasn't just then.
Okay,
Let
me try it with myself unmuted. Sorry about that, everybody. Try that again here.
You also need to set sound sharing on the sharing page.
So in 2021, we applied for the New Mexico Healthy Soil Grant. It's a program that assists agriculturists in implementing regenerative agriculture practices. Part of our grant proposal was to plant a multi-species cover crop. We learned a lot from that process. We tried to implement the Healthy Soil Grant funding across all of our acres in that 1 year. Once we planted our crop, we didn't get a rain after that time, and so the timing was not ideal. But it did enable us to learn a lot. That is what enabled us to initiate our soil tests, entering into regenerative agriculture.
And really, what it did was the grant give us courage, basically, to go out and try some of this. And we bought the seed for our farming operation through the grant. Come on, without that grant, so that's a hard step to take. So that is a wonderful thing. And then even though we didn't get the rains in that semester, well, those seeds were still there and the rains came in the fall. Well, we got some sort of cover in the late fall. The improvement of the grass was huge.
In one cycle of the grant, I think we would focus on something specific and maybe not as many acres at one time so that we could see the maximum benefit.
The grant brings that confidence to go ahead and take that chance And we need so much more of that today. And this comes from, I don't know if you want to call it awakening or what regenerative ag has done to me, but that sunrise every morning tells me to live that day. Do the best you can. Don't worry about the rest. Live that day.
Okay, so hope everyone enjoyed that video. But what steps did the Bostwicks take to produce a successful Healthy Soil Program grant application? So next slide, we're going to discuss the 2 critical steps that individual applicants can take to ensure that they have a successful application. And the first one is conservation planning. And conservation planning is completed in cooperation with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service or an NRCS certified conservation planner. And then 2, project sponsorship. That's also a critical component to an individual application. And this comes from a soil and water conservation district or your Pueblo, tribe, or nation. So those are the 2 critical components of putting together a grant application, a grant application that will allow you to have a successful application. So next slide, please. And it's at this point that I would like to introduce Kenneth Alcone, who is with the USDA NRCS in New Mexico, and he's going to guide you through the kind of the steps or the process of conservation planning. And Katie, I do believe that he's actually on, so.
That is true, Dean. I was able to get on, so thank you.
All right, perfect. I'll turn it over to you, Kenny.
All right, thank you, Dean. Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Dean. So I'd like to start off by saying that NRCS has a very good working relationship with NMDA as one of our crucial partners that we do for conservation planning. They're one of our partners that we use for their Healthy Soils grant program. And what I really want to do here is give you kind of the 40,000 foot elevation view of, conservation planning from an NRCS standpoint. So what is the conservation planning in a nutshell? Is it's a process that NRCS uses. It's a 9-step process. It's tried and true. We've used this, for many years, and it's really to go out there to help the land manager observe and better understand what their natural resources are. And those can be from soil, water, air, plant, human, energy, all these different resources. And then from there, we get the client's objectives, and then we look at what their goals and objectives are. And then we look at what are the resource concerns, and then what I call, what are the things we have in our toolbox, practices to address those types of resource concerns. One thing that's very important in this process is that, as it's stated here, is that it all begins in person, and we need to be out on the ground in the field. It can be done over the phone. It can be done behind a computer screen, over email. This process has to be done on the ground in order to be able to come up with a good product. And what I've always said with conservation planning is, it's not that individual NRCS employees' plan, it's the producer's plan. They have to be bought off and sold off on it. It's their plan. In order for it to be successful, they have to have buy-in, because at the end of the day, we're there to give that technical expertise and knowledge of that, the resources and what things we can do to address those resource concerns that are identified. As it says here, this is free, it's voluntary and collaborative. What I will want to stress here is that when it comes to conservation planning, there's 2 avenues. There's the general template that we're using with NMDA, where it's a real basic conservation plan that we developed strictly for the Healthy Soils grant program. But then there's a real comprehensive conservation plan that NRCS can do with folks. And when it really comes down to those types of plans or conservation planning, it's more in depth, and those usually involve when a producer comes in and applies for one of our Farm Bill programs, like the Environmental Qualities Incentives Program or the Conservation Stewardship Program. So that process is a lot more in depth, and that usually is triggered when a producer comes into the office to apply for one of our Farm Bill programs. So I just want to make sure that there's a distinction, that there's what I call the Corolla and then there's the Cadillac. And in most cases, when we're dealing with the NMDA Healthy Souls program, we're looking at that Corolla. And that doesn't mean that, it doesn't turn into a plan that gets developed to a higher level or tier, but that's pretty much us getting our foot in the door with those producers, because really we're trying to capture a lot of those folks that in many cases may be our non-traditional type of producers that we work with in our daily activities as an agency. Next slide, please. So who will NRCS help with conservation planning? It's any land manager. It's, you can own it, you can lease it, you can be the manager. It can be on public land, it could be on private land, as well as tribal land. It's very important that, we really cross all those jurisdictional boundaries. And as I think Katie or Dean mentioned earlier, there's really no size limit to what a conservation plan can be. We're going to start doing a lot of what we call urban ag. Albuquerque is one of the pilot cities that we're using for urban ag. So we're going to be working with a lot of these landowners in their backyards. It could be with raised beds, it could be with low tunnels. So really, the size of the operation does not matter. Like I said, it could be as small as somebody's backyard. What's the land uses that we cover? As they're stated here, it could be anything from rangeland, cropland, forest land, urban ag. I see there urban land. That's a new one for us. It could be, orchards. There's a whole slew of, pretty much if you can grow a crop or a commodity off it, it's eligible to have that conservation plan written on there. Next slide, please. So how long does it take to complete this conservation planning process with NRCS? Again, it's going to depend on the size. It could be as basic as somebody's backyard, and it could be as complex as working on a 25, 30,000 acre ranch out there in New Mexico. So, I mean, that the realm of how large and how complex a conservation plan can get, it really depends on that initial site visit, meeting with that producer, finding out what their goals and objectives are. And like I said, we want to, I've always told people, you got to learn to crawl before you walk, before you can run. So, we want to take this process slow. Again, it's a process where we want to get the producer's input. This is a collaborative, to me, conservation planning is a dynamic plan that is really never completed, because things change on operations. It could be, one year you're doing this, next year you're looking at something else. So it's a dynamic plan. But what do we want to do? We want to go out there and document your current management. These are, your objectives, your goals. We want to list what your soil health related goals are for this particular program. We have the 5 soil health principles. We want to make sure that we tie into those. And then, the next step in this, and I think the word has gotten out, that this is something that is voluntarily, it is free. And you want to contact your local NRCS field office as soon as you can, if you haven't done so already. Later on in the slides, we have a list of all the different, we have pretty much NRCS field office in every county with the exception of Los Alamos County. Every county in New Mexico has an NRCS field office located within them. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But, NMDA Soul, Healthy Soul program, you're applying for these grants. Like I said, in many cases, this could be a real basic plan, but it could in the future or at the present time could turn into something a lot more complex. But for the purposes of this program, we're really wanting to do that. Like I said, I call it the Corolla plan. Not to say that a Corolla plan doesn't have all the things you need from a conservation planning standpoint, like I said, but it'll give you the basics of what you need to be able to be successful in applying for these grant programs. If you wanted to, like I said, after this process and you want to get more in depth, you can actually work with that NRCS local field office. Typically, you're going to work with a conservation planner that's certified, and they'll run you through that whole gamut. As far as, writing a comprehensive, conservation plan, which, like I said earlier, is probably more for those farm bill programs where, you're applying for, EQIP, environmental qualities incentives program, those types of things. But when it comes to the NMDA's conservation planning template, it's down to 4 pages. So like I said, there's a large realm of, from a basic plan to a really complex plan that can be done when you're looking at a conservation plan. We're using the templates that were developed in conjunction with NMDA and NRCS when it comes to doing these templates for the Healthy Souls grant program. Next slide. So this is a map. What I would recommend to everybody on this call is you may want to just bookmark. There's the website there, but there's a slew of information on our nm.nrcs webpage. This is just a map of New Mexico. Like I said earlier, every one of these counties that are shown here have an NRCS local field office, with the exception of Los Alamos County. And what I would recommend is that you make an appointment and meet with those field offices, because that's your first contact. We really want producers to make that initial contact with that local field office. They don't want to start at the area level or at the state office level, like with myself, because those are the people you're going to be working on your conservation plan from the start to the finish of it. So that it's very important that you build that relationship with that local NRCS field office staff, because they'll be able to guide you in not just a conservation plan, but other technical assistance that's available, or even financial assistance that we do. We call it conservation technical assistance. We're pretty bad about using acronyms, but CTA, conservation technical assistance. So I would highly recommend that folks go and find out who your district conservationist is. New Mexico is in a team concept, so not every office has a district conservationist, but every office will have what we call now a lead planner, and either a soil con or a range con, or maybe a technician in that local field office. And those folks can help you develop, like I said, that basic conservation plan, or if needed, that really complex conservation plan. But for the purposes of this program, the Healthy Souls grant program, we're really trying to focus those on that 4-page template for conservation planning. So any questions for me? I don't know, Katie, if you want to wait for questions till the end, or if they have questions for me now, I can answer them. However you want to handle that, Katie.
Be glad to take a question very specific to NRCS conservation planning, if there is one. I have one to pitch your direction, Kenny, and I know Dean is keeping eyes on the chat, but for someone who's located in Los Alamos, where do they go for an NRCS conservation plan, given that there's not a service center there in their county?
They could go probably to Santa Fe, would be probably their closest office. I would recommend that they just go down the hill from Los Alamos and go down into Santa Fe County. We have an office there. Also, we have an office there in Hernandez. So that's another option there. So really, whatever's convenient to that producer in Los Alamos County, that's what I would recommend. Whatever's closer to them is just make contact with that local, like I said, field office. And then from there, we'll figure out which office is probably logistically located to help that producer.
Thank you, Kenny. Dean, I'll turn it back to you if there's a question in the chat. Otherwise, I think we're ready to continue.
Yes, there is one question in the chat, and we will try to, if time permitting, we will go over the conservation planning templates at the end of the presentation. So, and then I think we'll just we'll move on to the next slide, and this is where we're actually going to just kind of give you a brief overview of the conservation planning templates. So, next slide, please. Okay, and like Kenny mentioned, NMDA worked very closely with NRCS staff to develop these conservation planning templates. And these templates, they are fairly comprehensive. They identify your potential resource concerns as they relate to soil health. They identify potential alternatives, but they also have space in them for you as the individual applicant, the farmer, the rancher, the land manager, to provide your specific soil health related goals. And so, like Kenny had mentioned, it's important to have your goals and objectives ahead of time. And so we encourage each individual applicant to go to the NMDA website and have this printed off. We do have one for cropland and one for rangeland. And so any type of production system that involves crops, vegetables, orchards, etc., would utilize the cropland one. And then any type of rangeland, grazing operation, forestry operation where you're grazing, you will use the rangeland template. So I would encourage you to have these on hand when you make the visit with NRCS, and that way that part of it's kind of out of the way, and you can just get down to work and concentrate on the developing or understanding the resource concerns and developing the project. So next slide, please. So after you have completed conservation planning with NRCS, it's now time to develop your project idea. And so NRCS is going to help you identify those resource concerns related to soil health on your operation, whatever that operation may be. And they will likely provide some alternatives, some practices that you can utilize to address those resource concerns. And that's what begins to develop your project idea. And so next slide, please. And so in light of that, again, NMDA worked closely with NRCS to develop these resource concern guide sheets. And the resource concern guide sheets, basically, if NRCS identifies a resource concern that may exist on the land that you're operating on, this guide will help you take a look at the resource concerns and take a look at some of the potential options for practices, agriculture practices, to address those resource concerns. And so this is not something that you have to turn in. This is simply a guide sheet for you to utilize in conjunction. I would recommend to have this on hand when you meet with your NRCS conservation planner, and you can kind of go through it and help start developing an idea for your project and how you want to implement your project and what resource concerns you wish to address. And so again, the resource concern guide sheets they are not a document that you have anything to fill out and turn in. They are simply for your use and your guidance. So next slide, please. Okay, so as you begin the conservation planning process, you've identified your resource concerns. You've started to look at some of the practices you may use. You are now going to begin looking at the 5 soil health principles as it pertains to your project. These soil health principles, they are not prescriptive. In that, I mean that it's not a specific practice that you're going to utilize. It's a principle. So you look at number 1, keeping soil covered. So in your project, if it's identified that you have some bare ground that needs to be covered, you would be utilizing healthy soil principle number 1 to keep soil covered. Now, there's a variety of practices that you may utilize to do that. And so we'll just go through the remainder of the soil health principles. Number 2 is minimizing soil disturbance on cropland and minimizing external inputs. Number 3, maximizing biodiversity. Number 4, maintaining a living root. And number 5, integrating animals into land management, including grazing animals, birds, beneficial insects, or keystone species such as earthworms. So as you're putting your project together, the one thing you have to understand is that the Healthy Soil Program grants must include at least one of the 5 soil health principles. But as you begin to look at your project, you're going to realize that these principles are very, very rarely a standalone principle. They're all kind of tied together. But we do encourage you as you're developing your project to understand that at least one of the 5 soil health principles must be addressed when you're developing your project. And so conservation planning will help you determine those resource concerns, the soil health principles, along with the NRCS planner and the resource concern guide sheets will help you to target those practices that are going to address your soil health resource concerns. Next slide, please. These are just some of the popular projects that we have funded with Healthy Soil Program grants in the past. I think everybody on here is probably going to be familiar with at least one of these. we have had individual applicants apply for cover cropping, reestablishing native plant species, applying compost and or biochar, establishing pollinator habitat, bell grazing, temporary fencing, and riparian habitat restoration. This is not an all-encompassing list by no means, but it's just an idea of some of the things that have been done in the past with the Healthy Soil Program to kind of give you an idea of what things are possible. But again, we want you to focus on that conservation planning within RCS to determine what's appropriate for the particular land that you manage. So it's at this point that I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Katie and let her take over the presentation at this point.
Great, thank you, Dean. As you probably gathered, Dean is very technical in his background. He came to us after years in natural resources management and still produces crops and livestock out in eastern New Mexico. So a real asset to informing the technical undergirding of NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. So Dean teed us up nicely. Now that you have that project idea in mind, what are the next steps? So we'll go through them in the subsequent slides here. So the first thing to do is to begin laying out the timeline of your activities. What will you do and when? We'll walk through the calendar in just a moment to help you answer that question. The next thing to do is to ask yourself, what goods and services are necessary to implement this project? And then you'll want to consult our resources to figure out which of those necessary expenses are eligible for grant funding. So notice that this question comes later in the process. We don't start with the question of what can I buy with this grant? That's sort of where we end the process here. And as I mentioned, you'll want to consult our FAQ, our frequently asked questions, to better understand not just those eligible versus ineligible expenses, but really all facets of NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. So this slide is critical to understand the timeline within which any Healthy Soil Program project must fit. We are operating on state monies, and we are operating on a state fiscal calendar. It starts in July, it ends in June. So in order for us to get all of the paperwork in order at the start of that fiscal year and then wrap things up at the end of the fiscal year, what we're constrained to is 10 months in between. So we've worked really hard to help people maximize as much of that one-year calendar as possible. Where that lands us is this 10-month window. So projects have to start no earlier than August 1st of 2023. They have to end no later than May 31st of next year. So again, what we're looking at is a 10-month cycle here, and there's several agricultural seasons within those 10 months. So that's really how we've designed the budget template that you'll see in just a moment. I want to talk about some of our eligible and ineligible expenses. These are just examples. So certainly what you see on the screen is not exhaustive. You're not ready to work on your budget template just for having seen this particular slide. You'll want to be sure to consult our frequently asked questions to see a more comprehensive list of what you can and cannot purchase. But if you'll just stick with me on the the left-hand side of the screen, we'll look at the things that we really encourage people to consider when they're drawing up their budget. But remember that what you ask for in terms of grant funding has to point back to that conservation planning, has to help address those resource concerns and speak to those soil health principles. So some things that are eligible for funding consideration are these types of non-durable goods. When I say non-durable, I mean something tangible, but it's short-lived. So I'm sitting here drinking a cup of tea tonight, and I'm thinking the tea bag in here is definitely a non-durable good. It's something I can touch, but it's not going to last a long time. So when we talk about our durable goods, we're talking about things like cover crop seed. We're talking about things like compost. So that is something that we can consider for funding, and certainly many of our projects have incorporated those items before. When we talk about durable goods, we're talking about things that are tangible and long-lived. So going back to my cup of tea here, I'm thinking about the mug. This is something I can touch. This is something that's going to last me a long period of time. Anyone who has investigated NMDA's Healthy Soil Program in years past will notice a huge change here for the better. Okay, so what we allow now, because of a change in the procurement code, is that you can ask for durable goods whose value is up to just beneath $5,000. So at $5,000 and above, we cannot help you make that purchase. But if the price tag for a durable good is just beneath $5,000, it can be considered. Again, within our program's limitations. So really encourage you to check out our FAQ. Those frequently asked questions really help to spell out some things that we will and will not consider for funding. When we talk about services, we're talking about specialized work. I think of words that end in ing, like testing the soil, renting equipment, perhaps hiring a business to perform a specialized service. So going back to my example of tea, had I bought this at my local coffee shop, then I would have been paying for the service of brewing and serving me the tea. So you want to check out our FAQ and figure out what it is that you can ask funding for in order to incorporate certain services in your project. We'll talk about testing of the soil here in just a moment. You'll see that that is eligible for purchase. Now, if you'll shift your focus to the right-hand side of the screen, things that are ineligible for funding consideration. Right off the bat, cash crop seed. We will not help you purchase hemp seed or chili seed or any sort of stone fruit tree stock, for instance. So those are automatically off limits. We're looking for things that are cover crop seed in nature. Also out of bounds in terms of those non-durable goods are animals, okay? We will not help populate the farm, even though your project may call for some animal integration. On the durable guides, we're still looking at that $5,000 limit. So at $5,000 or above, automatically out of bounds. And there are other durable goods that are outside the scope of our program. Again, check out our FAQ to learn more. Same goes for services that paying yourself, your employees, or your household members, or renting things that you already own. That is considered match. That's the match and the in-kind contribution that you'll make to your own project. And what we require from all of our grantees is that whatever amount of funding you're requesting, you're putting at least 25% of that amount in of your own contributions. And oftentimes for everyone, that is labor. So that will be the bulk of anyone's contribution to their own project. It does not have to be cash money. It can be your own time. And I'll just close by putting an exclamation point on something you've heard me say quite a bit, and that is to encourage you to check out our FAQ. So we'll take a closer look at this in just a moment. Dean's got some examples in his head of things that might show up in this type of document here, but this looks very complex until you spend a little time with it. So if you'll start on the left-hand side of the screen, what you'll notice is that this document asks for you to think about your project activities first, not the associated expenses first. Think about what you will do to implement your project, okay? And what we've done this year, a little different from years past, is simplify things. You don't need a specific day. You don't need a specific month. Tell us more or less the season. We're looking for quarters here, okay? It's a 10-month grant, as I mentioned earlier. So name for us the activities you'll accomplish in that first quarter between August and November. Then you'll think about your second quarter's activities when things start cooling down really in December through February. And then when things warm up and just before the grant ends, that's your third and final quarter of the project. So we're asking you to think of your timeline in terms of the quarters of the grant term that more or less align with the agricultural seasons. Then we'll ask you for a brief description of each project activity, okay? And that's what you'll want to put in this column right here. You'll notice we've already plugged in one of the required activities for the grant. Every single project, as you'll hear in a coming slide, has to start in the field with you sampling your soil to send it off to a lab, but also to check it out in a physical sense right there in the field. And we ask people to be fairly descriptive when they're filling these out. If you simply tell us, hey, I'd like some cover crop seed, you better believe we're going to wonder what kind of cover crop seed. So you'll want to be specific when you make those requests within this template. We want to see that you have matched appropriately the right species to the landscape that you're operating in, as well as to the resource concern you're attempting to address. All right, so we've covered this first kind of set of columns. related to the timeline and the description of your project activities. Now we get into how your project looks in terms of the non-durable goods associated with these project activities versus the durable goods versus the service. So notice with soil testing, that's a service. That's something, a specialized activity you're paying someone else to do. We'll ask you to put the name of the business performing that service. Okay, you'll list the number of soil tests to be taken there. That'll depend on the size of your operation and the number of different soil types perhaps that you have identified within your location, your project site. You'll name the cost of the unit and let the template do the rest. It does self-calculate. All right, so next, pretty exciting part of the presentation from my point of view. In addition to hearing from Kenny Alcon with NRCS, we get to hear from two partners to NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. And what they'll be talking about is the parties that they represent. These are the only two parties that can provide project sponsorship. You have to have a project sponsor, okay? And I'll explain why in just a moment, but stay tuned. We'll introduce you to Chairman Eddie Vigil. He's the chairman of the State Soil and Water Conservation Commission, tuning in from Santa Fe tonight, but more often than not, you can find him down in Otero County, where he's a member of the Board of Supervisors there. And then we'll hear from John Romero at the Pueblo of Jemez. And he's a new addition to our program. He is, we're doing a pilot effort with the Healthy Soil Working Group. And through this collaborative effort, John is working to reach some of the pueblos, the tribes, the nations in the state, as well as their individual members. So you'll want to make sure if you're a member of those communities that you reach out to John and make good contact there. Let me just describe a bit about why project sponsorship is even required. What are the benefits? So you cannot apply, as I said, cannot apply as an individual applicant unless you have a project sponsor. And there's only two parties that can provide you that sponsorship. One is a soil and water conservation district. If you're a member of a tribal community, you can go to a soil and water conservation district or the leadership of your pueblo, your tribe, your nation. So you've got two options there if you're a member of a tribal community in New Mexico. And it's a pretty important function that they serve. They are the liaison between you as the individual doing the work out in the field and us here at NMDA, where the grant funding resides. So we really count on that project sponsor to be the liaison in terms of communication and just some of the boxes that have to be checked for project performance on any time a grant is received. So the project sponsor has just one site visit they have to make. And we ask them to do this at the start of the grant. That's so a relationship can be established there. You get to know each other a little bit, ask each other, maybe preferred ways of communicating. Is it over email? Is it over text? Is it over the phone? Establish that relationship in ways that work best for that project sponsor to facilitate the implementation of this grant. They're going to help you collect those soil samples, maybe learn with you as you're collecting those soil samples. For lab-based soil testing, you'll send it off to a specialized lab. You'll also do some physical assessment there in the field. So we require that for any of our grantees that we get a baseline assessment of soil health in New Mexico, and this is how that happens. As I mentioned, the project sponsor helps you in a number of different ways throughout this 10-month grant term. They're communicating with us here at NMDA and communicating with you out in the field. They're also helping to make sure that you invoice correctly so that you get paid in time and in full, on time and in full, okay? So we'll talk about the reimbursement process in just a moment. We have a few quarterly reports required of any grantee here at NMDA, and they'll help you make sure to meet those deadlines in terms of report submission. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to Eddie Vigil from the State Soil and Water Conservation Commission and from Otero Soil and Water Conservation District, just to give you a more personal sense of the districts and how you go about contacting them. So, Mr. Chairman, if I can call on you, please.
Thank you, Katie and Bruce. Like I said, in New Mexico, there are 47 soil and water conservation districts. Each SWCD is a political subdivision of the state with its own board of supervisors. And each board of supervisors has its own monthly meeting schedule. You are encouraged to attend your SWCD monthly meeting to share your details of your project. And as you can see, there's a map of the 47 districts. You know, some of the districts covered multiple counties. They don't all serve in the same county sometimes, but there are 47 districts, and you're encouraged to find your local SWCD. And here's a website for you to look at.
And thank you. Thank you for that, Eddie. Would you recommend that people reach out sooner or later in order to get on the dance card of the Soil and Water Conservation District?
I would say sooner is better than later.
We would agree with that here at NMDA. So any other comments, Eddie, or messages of encouragement to potential applicants this evening?
Like I said, I think any of the 47 districts, wherever you're the closest district to, contact your local supervisors, your local board, and like I said, they will be more than glad to help you be a sponsor for your project. So if you have any questions, please contact your local district.
Very good. Thank you for that, Eddie. Really appreciate your time this evening. We know you're busy up in Santa Fe, so appreciate you being here tonight to share a bit of insight on the soil and water conservation districts. Thank you. All right. And our next speaker plays a similar role, as does Chairman Vigil. So you heard just a moment ago about how soil and water conservation districts can serve as project sponsors. So can pueblos, tribes, and nations if you're a member of those communities. So if you're a tribal member, you have those two options. You can go to a district or you can go to your tribal leadership. So to speak a bit more to that, I'd like to ask John Romero to open up his microphone and say a bit about what's on this slide here. So John.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Katie. My name is John Romero, and I'm from the Pueblo of Jemez. I work for the Pueblo as the rangeland manager. I've been in this position for about 13 years now. I also serve on a board of county committee at FSA, but I took on this this work because I feel that the challenge is worth it. But in New Mexico, there are 23 pueblos, or actually there's 19 pueblos, but there's also the Navajos and the Mescalero and Jicarilla. And out of those reservations, about 10.6% makes up the New Mexico population, with about 200,000 people. And out of those tribes, I did a little bit of research. There's about 2 million acres of tribal land. And out of that 2 million acres, I'm not sure what the exact amount is for ag and range, but there is quite a bit, and I think there's quite a bit to do on the tribal land. So if any one of you are from a tribe or a reservation, reach out and then let's get together. And I'll be also making the visits out to as many Pueblos and Apache nations and the Navajo Nation as well. So I don't have much else, but if you're from a reservation or a tribe, I'll be happy to share my info here at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
John, that's great. Really appreciate your comments tonight and for you joining the effort to ensure, better participation among tribal communities and tribal members across the state. Really appreciate this new pilot partnership. Thank you. So kind of putting a bow on what it is you just heard from both Eddie and from John, how do you go about getting project sponsorship? Well, by this point, you know that you have two avenues if you're a tribal member. For most people, it might be that your soil and water conservation district is going to be your project sponsor. First thing to do here is identify who your intended project sponsor will be. And as you heard Eddie say, reach out to them sooner, not later. So tell them you're applying for a grant from NMDA's Healthy Soil Program, and then ask them what they need from you. This is not a one-way street. It's possible they will be very interested and say, we require that you come to our leadership meeting. We want to hear more about your project from you. So they might ask you to bring or email some of your project documents. We've heard from some districts that they like to see people's conservation plans so that they can make a relationship with you and support you, not just for this particular project, but for other ventures you might want to make in the future to improve the land that you work on. The last step will be to utilize our letter of support template. I'll show that to you in just a moment. It lives on the website along with all of our other required documents for the Healthy Soil Program. So what you'll want to do is print off that letter of support template, fill it out, the parts that belong to you, and take it to your identified project sponsor. Again, that could be your Soil and Water Conservation District, or if you're a member of a tribal community, you can approach your district or the community that you're a member of. And then when it all comes down to the end, before you hit submit on your application, you'll want to make sure you upload that template. And here's what it looks like. So again, this lives on our website alongside all of our other application documents. It's a fairly short document, it's just 3 pages long. That first page is to be completed by you, the potential grantee. So you'll let the project sponsor know about your project. Feel free to add more pages to it or some photos to give them a sense of what it is you're going to be doing. And then they will take over from there, signing off on the project that they are soon to sponsor. This form really lays out what it is that's required of the project sponsor. And in return, we offer a 10% administrative fee to our project sponsors for really helping to facilitate these projects. Again, acting as liaison between us at NMDA and you out in the field. When it all comes down to the end, before April 21st at noon, that's Mountain Time, you'll want to hit submit on your application. Hopefully by now, everyone has had an opportunity to click on the link and see that we're utilizing online grant software. That's where you make application. And all of your documents get uploaded within the specific prompts on that online application. I want to note here something that you might already have assumed, but just to say it out loud here, we will not accept late applications or incomplete applications. So the onus is really on you to check and double check and maybe even triple check that application before you hit submit. So thinking ahead, very optimistically here, what if you're selected? What if your project is chosen? Let me say a bit about the review process here at NMDA. We enlist several members of our eligible entity communities, so we make sure that Pueblos, tribes, and nations, we have a voice at the table for that community, for the land grants, for the acequias, for soil and water conservation districts, from Extension as an eligible entity and also a huge scientific research partner for us, and also NRCS, making sure that we've got different eyes on every application and evaluating things from their different vantage points. From there, that body makes recommendations to Secretary Whitty, as the Secretary of Agriculture, the state's top-ranking agricultural official, will make final determinations as to which projects will be funded. So if you're chosen, here are some really critical dates I'd like you to write down and try to put in the back of your brains. So July 10th, with the time yet to be determined, we will host a mandatory online training for all of our grantees, plus their project sponsors. And the type of content we'll cover in that training will just be how you go about your first requirement, which is soil testing and soil assessment. And then also how you work together, you as the grantee, the individual applicant, plus your project sponsor, to do things like invoicing and reporting on grant progress, that sort of thing. So it's required that those two parties show up to that online training. Then we'll start distributing the paperwork that really firms up the relationship between you out in the field, your project sponsor, and us at NMDA. We'll give a few weeks to return us that signed paperwork. And as soon as we have that in hand, you're ready to go. The project can begin, again, starting with that field work of soil testing and soil assessment. So we, again, encourage you to check out the FAQ, our frequently asked questions document, to see other important dates in that whole 10-month cycle for our grants. I've mentioned this a couple of times, so let's just dive in a little deeper here. All of our projects are required to start with soil testing and soil assessment. We build in this requirement because the whole legislation that created our program says we've got to establish a baseline soil assessment here in New Mexico. The way we do that is we gather data from each of our projects to get a fuller picture of what soil health looks like in New Mexico, and with strong hopes that each of these projects helps to advance that soil health. So the distinction we make between soil testing and soil assessment is pretty simple. Soil testing, it's a service performed in a lab for a fee. You saw it built into our budget template earlier. We require that each of you send a pre-project soil sample to a lab, and the lab is of your choosing, but that lab is going to analyze the soil specifically for a chemical analysis. So again, this is a requirement for each of the grantees. And we require that you report those pre-project results, again, so we can establish that baseline soil assessment across the state. As you saw in the budget template, we reimburse that cost because we require it. It's an essential part of our program. So it's already built into the template for you. All you've got to do is choose the lab and come up with the right approach for the number of samples to submit, where you'll take those samples from your project site and that sort of thing. It's actually a question in the application. Soil assessment is an activity you can do at any time. It's for free. It happens out in the field. We've got some resources that we'll be sharing during our grant training about how to go about physical assessment of your soil in the field. But we require that every grantee, individual applicants and eligible entities alike, every grantee assess the soil before the project, but also after. And Dean would tell you, as the more technical minded of the two of us, he'd say, you know, we would hope to see some change between those samples, the pre-project and the post-project. We might see some good improvement there in just 10 months' time. So we require that you assess the soil pre and post-project, and you report us those results. And a little reminder off here in the corner is that if you're not quite sure how to go about these processes, this is when you engage your project sponsor. You can also reach out to NRCS and to NMSU's Cooperative Extension Service for some support on how to go about collecting the samples and making them appropriate for lab submission. So this is a really important slide because it talks about how grant funds are paid. They are not paid up front, okay? They are paid on the basis of cost reimbursement. So what that means is that you have to reimburse the cost of your approved budget items first, and then seek reimbursement. Notice I didn't say you have to wait till the clear end of the grant term. That's not the case here. Instead, you'll read here in just a few beats that we make payments as frequently as we are invoiced. In fact, we have a little mantra around here at the Healthy Soil Program where we say, invoice us early, invoice us often. We want to pay out frequently. So we ask people to make those small purchases and seek reimbursement frequently. And this helps everybody. It helps you stay on top of your project. It helps your project sponsor know that things are moving along. It helps NMDA move the dollars where they're intended, which is on the ground implementing these projects. So the process is pretty simple. You work with your project sponsor, create an invoice and provide those receipts, just showing proof that you actually have bought the approved budget items. And then we in turn pay your project sponsor. They in turn will pay you. So again, invoice us early, invoice us often, and that's how projects unspool over time. I want to offer an important note here at the bottom, and perhaps Rob Hirsch will offer a bit of information in the chat here. But anyone who reads this information and goes, gosh, I don't know if I can get my project started. If you're concerned about those initial project expenses, that's okay. The New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group, represented here by Rob this evening, and I believe Isabel is also on. They've come up with a really neat thing called a bridge funding opportunity to help you kind of clear that hurdle of initiating that initial expense. And so there's a bit of contact information there to reach out to Rob, to reach out to the Healthy Soil Working Group and ask about that bridge funding opportunity to help you clear that initial hurdle. And then you'll get in the cycle of receiving of those reimbursements from NMDA. All right, you've heard a lot of information over the last, hour here. And so let's try to put a bow on it now. So how do you, an individual applicant, apply for a Healthy Soil Program grant? Again, individual applicants are individuals, they're businesses, they're nonprofits. They're involved directly in farming, ranching, or another form of land management in New Mexico. Dean offered us the reminder at the start of the presentation that you can be on farmland, you can be on rangeland, in an orchard, a subsistence gardens, a subsistence garden, lots of different land uses. Welcome to participate in our program. No minimum acreage requirement, no ownership requirement, just so long as you have permission of the landowner. So lots of people welcome to come in through this portal to apply for a grant. First things first, you have to complete conservation planning with NRCS or an NRCS certified conservation planner. We heard from Kenny Alcon on that process. Call them up as soon as you can and make an appointment so that they can come out to your field, your project site, and help you get a conservation plan going. That conservation plan is the foundation to all things arising to create a project. So we have to start there with conservation planning, and you'll use that, as I said, to develop your project idea. From there, you'll want to make initial contact, not final contact, but initial contact with your project sponsor. Let them know you're applying for a Healthy Soil Program grant. Again, whether it's a soil and water conservation district or your Pueblo tribe or nation, let them know that you'll be seeking their signatures to firm up a relationship with them as your project sponsor. We have to have that relationship in place. I'll show you the online application in just a moment so you can see the online questions that you'll be asked to answer as part of your application. Of course, uploading these other documents that we've talked about tonight. And last but not least, you'll want to go to your project sponsor and say, you know, I reached out to you earlier. Now I'm back. I've got all my project details in order, and I need your signature here showing that you will sponsor me for the entirety of this 10-month grant. So once you get that signature, you've got all your other documents in place, you're ready to upload all those things to your online application, check and double check it, and get it submitted by our deadline of 12 p.m. on April 21st. So that's noon, and come 12:01, the door will be shut. So you don't want to be late. You'll want to make sure that you're submitting with a bit of cushion of time there. And we've mentioned to you the Healthy Soil Program website. It's likely that you've already found it because that's how you got registered for tonight's webinar. So we'll take a peek at the website here in just a moment, but that's where the documents all live, and as does the link to the application. It itself is online. And so I see quite a big number of things in the chat here. And so we'll go through some questions, Dean, and then maybe take a peek at some of our other documents. So let me go ahead and stop sharing, and that way I can help you sort through the chat here.
Okay, I tried to keep up, but they came in somewhat quick. But let me go back. There were several questions about the various documents, the template, the conservation planning template, budget template, resource concern guide sheets, and those are all available on the NMDA Healthy Soil Program webpage, as well as our FAQs, where you can take a look at the different types of eligible versus ineligible expenses and things of that nature. Those are all located on the NMDA Healthy Soil Program webpage.
Yeah, and Dean, let me take this opportunity to actually show that webpage. So I'm going to pop over there. And hopefully that's what you're seeing now as requirements for individual applicants.
Correct.
Okay, great. So Dean mentioned that this is where all the things specific to individual applicants reside. I'll just kind of scroll down so that you can see the linear fashion we've tried to lay things out in. So there at the top, conservation planning with NRCS. We offer this link so you can find that local service center that Kenny mentioned. We did do a webinar quite a while back with some partners all about conservation planning. So if you really want to immerse yourself in the language of conservation planning, you can check out that webinar. Not required, it's just there as a helpful resource. But Dean did mention the conservation planning templates that he worked with NRCS and others to create. That's where these live right here. So if you're working on cropland, you would select that first one. If you're working on rangeland, you would select that second one. Dean, if someone's working on a different land type, what would you recommend? If they're working in an orchard or a subsistence garden, how do they make the decision which of those templates to grab?
If you're working on an orchard or a subsistence garden, we kind of bundle that with cropland because you are producing either an annually produced crop or an orchard, and the cropland template will fit your particular scenario. If you're primarily grazing forage for livestock of some type, then the rangeland conservation planning template would likely be where you would need to look at. And so that's kind of how we differentiate those. If it becomes a question, I would again either work with your NRCS conservation planner to see where they think you would fall best, or send us an email to the HSP email, and we can kind of help clarify that if you provide us a description of your operation.
Thanks for that, Dean. And I just want to mark for people that the next bit of the website references bale grazing. So if Dean, if you could speak to that just for a moment, please.
Okay, of course, bale grazing has become fairly popular as of recent, and in an essence, it is basically the strategic placement of hay bales on either cropland or rangeland to incorporate organic matter by utilizing grazing animals to distribute that residue. In order to add bale grazing to your project application, we do require that you complete the bale grazing template that has been provided. Again, we worked on this to adhere to the NRCS standards for bale grazing, and so we encourage you, if you are going to utilize bale grazing, to also have that template created by an NRCS conservation planner or certified NRCS certified conservation planner, and that will need to be part of your application packet.
There you go. Thanks for that, Dean. I'll keep scrolling down just so people get a sense of what all lives on this website. Again, this is the one that's specific to individual applicants. So you'll notice in bold text here, here's actually the link to the online grant application. We can take a look at that in a moment. Also in some big bold letters here is that timeline and budget template I showed you earlier. Worth quite a few points within the overall application. So you'll want to make sure to spend some good time on that. And really organizing your thoughts, your activities, and the associated expenses. Okay, we also heard some speakers tonight from the Soil and Water Conservation District world, as well as on behalf of the state's Pueblos, tribes, and nations, talking about that required project sponsorship. So if you're curious to go find your local district, you could click here. If you're a member of a tribal community, contact information would be available on this link, okay? And the template, no matter which project sponsor you choose, you have to get a letter of support signed by them. And again, they may ask you, hey, we need you to come to a meeting. We want to hear details of your project. This is what you would utilize to get their signatures, just affirming that relationship, that they're willing to be your project sponsor for the duration of the 10-month grant. Noting here that these are additional resources. These are not required for you to complete and submit as part of your application. Nope, these are to help you. So the main thing here is our frequently asked questions document. You heard us make reference to that quite a bit this evening. Dean also referenced a couple of guide sheets. Again, they are there to guide you in the selection of possible project ideas. So if you're working on cropland and aren't quite sure where to start after conservation planning, we'd recommend coming and giving this a click. If you're on rangeland or something else that incorporates animals, come give this guide sheet a click and get some good project ideas going that can address those resource concerns that were identified for you through NRCS conservation planning. And last but not least, you heard us mention the opportunity that Rob and Isabel and others at the Healthy Soil Working Group want to make available to people who are concerned about those initial project expenses. So a bit of contact information to reach out to them here. So just sharing with you what lives on that website there. And now returning back to questions. And I see that we've got about 20 minutes here, Dean. So anything else we got a spotlight here? I'll be taking a peek along with you.
Yes, several have asked if this webinar and or slides will be available after this webinar.
Yes, the answer to both questions is yes, that we've been recording this evening and hope to make that available on the website before the week is out. Same story for the slides themselves. I'll put those in a PDF form, and that way you can access them beyond tonight's webinar. Okay. I'm seeing a really great note here from Shelley. Hi, Shelley. She said, if there's anybody in Los Alamos, and Shelley works at the Santa Fe Pojoaque Soil and Water Conservation District, she said, send them on to Santa Fe. They'll need sponsorship from her Soil and Water Conservation District. And they're located in the same office as the Santa Fe NRCS. So thank you for that note, Shelley.
There's a question about the scoring rubric with the grant materials. It says, do you share the scoring rubric with the grant materials? And I think Katie, you can address, how the points will be available on the application.
You're right, Dean. Thank you for that. Once you get into the application, before you answer some of the specific prompts, you will be bombarded almost, because that's how bold the text is, as to what amount of points are associated with the question that follows. So for instance, with the combined template that combines your timeline of activities along with the budget for those associated costs, 40 points, okay, out of a total of 100. So right there, we're telling you this is a really important document that deserves a lot of time and attention. All of the information that will go into that template, of course, you would have gotten out of conservation planning, plus thinking through the resource concerns you want to address, and doing your research online, going to the various websites where you will buy your seed from, let's say, figuring out what the soil test will cost you for the number of soil tests you plan to have conducted of your soil samples. So you'll see those prompts built within the application to let you know that these are really where points are tabulated and to what degree. Okay.
There's a question on basically what would make an application stand out. And one thing, start with conservation planning, and start with your NRCS conservation planner. Combine that with the soil health principles, and like Katie said, spend time researching the potential practices that you're going to implement, the cost associated, and provide as much detail as possible in how you're going to implement it. Seeding mixes, pay particular attention to working with NRCS and developing a correct seeding mix for your operation, as well as timing of your practices and stuff like that. And those are the types of things that will make an application definitely stand out. But again, focus on conservation planning and work with both your NRCS conservation planner as well as your project sponsor, because they, again, are involved in land management, and they can help direct a quality project as you're working with them.
Thanks for that, Dean. I see a great question here from Sarah Silva. Let me see if I can find it again. I'm doing a lot of scrolling here. Sarah says, I saw an alternative option for first-time applicants that don't require an NRCS conservation plan. Can you clarify this, please? I'd be glad to. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can see what it is Sarah's talking about. Make it teed up. Okay. Dean, are you seeing my login screen for the grant application?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to get logged in to my personal account that I set up earlier. Okay. And this is what Sarah is referring to. So you'll land at this homepage. And in future months, future years, you'll see other grant opportunities here. For right now, these are the things that are open and available. Tonight, we have talked about these, the grants. Okay, I'm going to click on this to get a little more text to drop down. So this actually has money associated with it. We told you at the top of the hour that we would welcome applications of up to $22,000 per project. And tonight we've really focused on what it is you have to do in order to apply for a grant. Here's what Sarah's question is about. And hopefully, Dean, you'll let me know if it's not following me as I click through these different things.
You're good.
Okay, so what Sarah's referring to here is this conservation planning opportunity for first-time individual applicants. And there is no money associated with this conservation planning opportunity. What it is, it's literally an opportunity for you to do conservation planning one-on-one with an NRCS certified conservation planner. They're going to set you up with a conservation plan sometime in the next year, so that this time next year, you can come to NMDA and say, got my conservation planning documents, I'm ready to apply. So this is really for people who are unable to get conservation planning done during this application cycle. Okay, this is to, excuse me, take you to a different kind of pathway that has no money associated with it. It's really just an opportunity to spend some one-on-one time with a conservation planner, and they'll get you set up sometime in this next year with a conservation plan. Dean, anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think I think you covered it well, Katie. It's just an opportunity for those individuals that would like to go through the conservation planning process prior to actually applying for a grant.
Okay. And Dean, I'm looking at the clock here and realizing that maybe this is a good time to switch screens over to your budget template and watch you fill out a couple of examples of, durable, non-durable goods, services, and see how that works.
Okay. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay, is everybody seeing the Excel spreadsheet?
Yes, it's
Okay.
really large, so maybe shrink it down a tad. Yes.
How's that?
I think you can enlarge it just a tad more. That looks great.
Okay. All right. So like Katie went through the timeline and budget template. Over here on the left-hand side, this is your project activities. This is where you will describe the timeline and give a description of the activity that you are going to complete.
And that top part of the screen is locked just so that information will follow.
Okay, so just to give an example, and like Katie mentioned, in the first quarter, pre-project soil testing is required, and that's kind of filled in for you already. But you will have to again determine. You'll have to determine the cost of your soil testing. You'll have to research the cost of your soil testing and which particular lab you're going to use and what testing method you are going to utilize for that. So that's already kind of filled in for you. But for tonight's example, let's take and let's do the first quarter. and we are going to give a description of a fall planted cover crop. Okay.
And Dean, if I could ask you to scroll down just a tad so it bumps up the line item you're working on.
Okay. There we
Thank
go.
you.
Is that
Perfect.
better?
That's
Okay.
perfect.
Okay, so we're gonna have a fall planted cover crop, and when you come over here to the non-durable good, this is where you actually want to put a fairly in-depth description of the fall planted cover crop. List your specific species that you're going to utilize for your fall planted cover crop, and I'm gonna be fairly simple with this one. We're going to use triticale and some radishes. If I can get it to type. And then from that point, you would list your seeding rate on either on here, which it's better on here if you can list your seeding rate. However, if you do have like a 10 to 15 species cover crop mix, we need the species here, and at bare minimum on your conservation planning template, you can provide the specific pounds per acre of each species that you're gonna complete. But it has to be listed somewhere, and if you have room here to list it, we do encourage that. And so this next one will be the number of units. So this number of units is the specific pounds that you're going to use. Oh wait, no, yeah.
You've got it. So let's show them. Let's pretend the application rate is, well, maybe not the application rate, but the total amount to be purchased is 50 pounds. So what would that look like here?
We got 50 over here is the number of units, and then we're going to use pounds here. Okay, we want to stray away from unspecific measurements such as, we're going to buy 5 bags of seed, or we're going to buy 10 bales of hay, or something to that effect. We want to be as specific as possible here. And then the cost per unit, you are going to have to determine that 50-pound mix that you're going to purchase of triticale and radish mix. You're going to have to visit with your seed supplier and determine that it's going to cost you $1.50 a pound. And this is likely incorrect, but we're just going to use $1.50 a pound for tonight as an example, and then you'll notice it automatically tabulates that for you. And so as you're going through your budget template, if you come over here to services, and we're gonna hire a company to plant this fall cover crop, and so the name of the service would be planting of fall cover crop. Okay, and this is where you're going to list the specific name of the business that is going to provide that service for you. So we're going to use Bob's Tractor Service. And the number of units that we're going to use is, we're going to use 4, and we're going to use hours. And then you're going to talk with Bob's Tractor Services, and you're going to determine that that Bob is going to charge you $8 an hour, and it will tabulate it automatically at $32 for that. And again, this is just an example of how you can complete this this budget template. And I'm sure I'm not going over nearly enough, but Katie, if you would direct me, I can definitely do some more stuff.
I think that's great. And I appreciate you building out 2 different purchases associated with one activity. That may be the case for a lot of your activities, is you plan to do one thing, but it involves multiple expenses. So it would be okay if you had some blank cells over under timeline and brief description, especially where you will have those activities that have multiple expenses associated with them. Dean keeps hovering over that bright red tab. There's no avoiding it. That's where the directions are. So when in doubt, if you get overwhelmed, take a step back, take a breath, and revisit those directions that basically encourage you to revisit the FAQ and to be brief but specific and to put things in chronological order. And finally, you'll want to upload this template as part of your online application. But this template is really where the rubber meets the road for us. It's what we at NMDA use for the duration of the 10-month grant. It's what your project sponsor will use to make sure you're meeting your targets in terms of, okay, we're in the second quarter now. It shows that you should be implementing these activities, and these are the expenses we're going to look for you to make, and that we'll reimburse if they're made. So spend some good time on this template after you've done that conservation planning. Do your research, get those prices figured out, and of course, with all of these things, reach out to us where you have questions. It's likely we'll point you back to the FAQ because there's a lot of good information embedded in that document. But we're happy to Dean and I take a look at those questions and help you sort them out. So I think that's great, Dean. And I'm looking at the time. We have just a few minutes before 7 o'clock, and we want to honor people's time this evening. So just taking a final peek here in the chat to see if there are other really high-level items that we need to elevate, Dean. See some great links so people can identify their soil and water conservation district. Rob offered some information about that bridge funding opportunity.
Katie, can I just say that it's a reimbursement program all through the 3 quarters. So you don't just have to get it for the initial investment in August. It could be throughout the course of the whole year that you get the upfront bridge funding, so you don't have to go out of pocket.
Great to know, Rob. Thank you for that update to my information.
There was a question on the the pre-project soil testing. The pre-project soil testing is required and will be reimbursed. And so I believe Katie mentioned it early on in the presentation as she was going over the soil testing requirements, that working with our partners, NMSU as well as NRCS, we've determined that the post-project soil testing will not likely benefit, will not likely show any measurable results in a small span of time. And so that's why we have went to the pre-project soil testing, so that we can allow you as an individual farmer, rancher, land manager to determine your baseline where your soils currently are. And so I hope that kind of clarifies that particular question.
I see a good question from Susan. Where do you report your match activities? And is there a set hourly amount for labor? Susan, in years past, we asked people to fill out as in-depth as their requested expenses, a budget for their matching expenses. And based on feedback we've heard in recent months, we are taking a different approach this year. So you will document those matching and in-kind contributions. Again, for most people, that will be their time, their labor. If you have some seed from a neighbor that you're going to invest in your project, you could certainly list that. Your own machine hours, if you'll be operating a tractor to get your project done. All these things have value, and we recognize that. So you'll document that within the application itself, not within the budget template. That's just for what you are requesting grant funds to do. Okay, we don't have a set labor rate because we recognize that different kinds of labor have different kinds of value. So for instance, if you're operating equipment that may come with a higher dollar amount, and depending on where you are in the state, it may be more valuable. Down around Carlsbad, for instance, to rent a no-till drill costs a pretty penny based on oil and gas activities going on down there and other potential buyers. So we leave that to the applicant to be fair to themselves in their estimation of what they're contributing to the project. I hope that helps. And Dean, we've done it. We have maximized the full hour and a half that we promised people we would not exceed. So really want to thank everyone for spending some good time with us this evening, asking some great questions. Again, we encourage you to visit the Healthy Soil Program website, clicking on that individual applicant subpage so that you can avail yourself of all the documents there, not just the link to the online application, but also those conservation planning templates, those resource concern guide sheets, FAQs, you name it. It all lives right there on the Healthy Soil Program webpage. So Dean, any closing comments from you before we wrap things up?
Other than just thanking everyone for their attendance, I would just encourage everyone, if your intention is to apply for a Healthy Soil Program grant this year, please contact your local NRCS office as well as your project sponsor as soon as possible, just to inform them of your intentions, and specifically with NRCS to kind of get on their schedule so that they can help you out with conservation planning, because that's the critical component. So that's really all I had to finish up.
That sounds great, Dean. I'll offer just a final thanks to Eddie Vigil from the State Soil and Water Conservation Commission, John Romero at Pueblo of Jemez, and also the new Intertribal Liaison for the Healthy Soil Program, Rob Hirsch, for pointing out that bridge funding opportunity, and again to all of our attendees. So we look forward to seeing your applications, and in the meantime, if you have questions, reach out to us here at NMDA. We thank everyone for joining us, and stay tuned for these resources following tonight's webinar. Thanks, everybody. Good night.